Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Now, today my guest is Peter L Cruz Ph.D. He's the Executive Director of the Public Ethics Academy and the Affiliate Associate Professor at Florida Atlantic University. Now, this is a very special university here in Florida, and Peter is doing something that is also special. So I want to say welcome to the Susan Brender Show, Peter Cruz, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Susan. I'm very happy to be here and happy to have met you a few weeks ago at our favorite spot in Delray Grangers.
Yeah, you got it. And, you know, I would like to know, how did you get sort of involved in that group that we met? Because it's a really wonderful group that wants to create a situation where all the wonderful artists and great kind of musicians and people who paint and people who want this place to be a very exciting arts town. How did you get involved?
Right. Well, through our mutual good friend, Dan Belante, who I've known for, I guess about 15 or 20 years now. Dan and I are currently involved as board members of the Delray Beach Playhouse, our Delray's own community theater out in Lake Ida East Park. And Dan and I have been good friends over the years, working with arts issues on and off. Dan was the chair of the Delray Beach Arts Board for several years, and after his term as chair ended, he was forming sort of an ad hoc group that would continue trying to work on very specific projects in and around Delray Beach as an adjunct to the art board, working with things like the Cornell Museum, Old School Square, other artists and entertainers in the area, trying to make Delray even a more beautiful city than it is already. And so being interested in arts and entertainment myself, that was sort of a natural fit to continue working with that. And even though I live in West Palm Beach, my second home is Delray because good friends have been down there for almost 30 years I've known, and I've watched Atlantic Avenue rise and thrive, and really all of Delray Beach is doing so well. I sort of wish I could live down there.
Yeah. You know, Peter, a lot of people in our audience come from places all over the country and all over the world. So when you talk about Delray Beach, Florida, and you talk about other places in Florida like West Palm Beach where you are, people don't think of it as arts communities. They think of Florida, they think of, I hate to say it, retired people, they think of golf, they think of things like that. But in your opinion, do they ever think of arts? I mean, because Florida, arts?
Well, you're right. I'm actually almost a Florida native. I grew up here and went to school and college here, and so I remember the days where there was really not a lot of things to do here in Florida, especially even in Southeast Florida, which has a lot more development than most of the state, and we were sort of culturally starved for many decades, and then various civic and leaders and philanthropists sort of came together, certainly in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm, later Delray, and started bringing culture down from the Northeast. I'm thinking of Alex Dreyfus up here in West Palm Beach, who was instrumental in getting the Kravis Performing Arts Center started and so many other museums and cultural events. And he had told me once that his reason for doing that is because he had an electronic engineering firm here, and he couldn't get engineers to relocate from the Northeast because there was nothing to do down here. And he said, well, if I'm going to continue being able to recruit, I have to raise the cultural level here. And that was the story here in West Palm Beach. Certainly, Delray's particular I sort of call it a boutique city because it's a small city, yet it has, for the size of the city, it has more restaurants, culture per square inch than I think of almost any other place that I can think of, certainly here in Florida, although there are many other nice places. But Delray seems to be able to, with the Arts Garage, with the theater, with the Arts Board, with Old School Square, it's just amazing how much is packed in such a small area. But I agree that the Florida and tourism and Disney sort of seem to have been, the things that most people think of. But once they get here, then they realize there's so much more to do.
Peter, it's an interesting thing, but I don't know which particular year, but it might have been like 2011, 2012. Delray was considered one of the most entertaining towns in America. And when I told that to a lot of my friends and people whom I know, they laughed. They said, "Oh, yeah, right, in all of America." And it's true. It was, for a small town, it's one of the best entertaining towns, and it's because of people like you and people like Dan Belamonte and people who really have a handle on how to make this an exciting and entertaining town. But I want to change courses with you for the moment. And now I want to talk to you about a little bit about what you do and why it's so interesting and important. And first question I have for you is, you decided to come back to South Florida and to this college called FAU, which is Florida Atlantic University, after some time away. And where did you go, and why did you come back?
Okay, interesting story. Florida Atlantic University is the state university here in Southeast Florida. There are two of them. There's Florida International in Miami and FAU here based in Palm Beach. And they're the two state universities here in Southeast Florida. And I've had an interesting connection to FAU. My mother was one of the first graduates in 1967 with a master's in education degree shortly after the university was formed. So I was around FAU as a child growing up and being taken to classes with her when she couldn't get a babysitter, for example. And then later I graduated from high school here in West Palm Beach, and FAU was the local university, so it seemed natural at that point to go there and get my bachelor's degree. And graduating in the late 70s, I went to Washington, D.C. and served in the Air Force as a medical service corps officer. Enjoyed that in the Northeast, but then was drawn back here to Florida in the early 80s, worked here for about 4 or 5 years in the healthcare industry, and got my master's degree from FAU. And so that's degree number 2. Left in 1986, worked in Martin County and in the western U.S. and New Mexico for a while. Came back again in the late 1980s and decided I really liked higher education and started my doctoral program, got a Ph.D., finishing in 1995. So then all 3 degrees were from FAU. And from 95 until just about 3 years ago, I was traveling the country teaching, first at Louisiana State University, then moving to California and teaching in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then finally outside Sacramento, California, at California State University at Chico, California. I stayed there for almost 15 years and retired just a little over 3 years ago from there, and then came back East Coast to Virginia, teaching some more, and then finally came back here to South Florida.
Well, and nobody can say that you're not a man who does quite a bit of
well-traveled, right, well-traveled person. So I've been out to the West Coast, back to the East, and back here. Well, what got me back to FAU again after so many years is that coming back, I was named a distinguished alumnus in 2015 by the university, which was something they shouldn't have done, but they did. And then they also asked me if I would teach part-time, a course here and there, which is fine to do. And then just about a year ago, maybe a little less, they asked me to help them restart the Public Ethics Academy at FAU, which we can talk a little bit about in a minute. And that's really, besides teaching, that's taking most of my time these days.
Yeah. Now, before we really get into the Public Ethics Academy, which is something that you started at FAU, I'd like you to define for people what you think is ethics or ethical. What does the word ethical mean to Peter Cruz?
Well, that's the philosophers have been talking about that since Plato's time in ancient Greece. Ethics is a set of, and this is mine and other people's definition blended, it's a set of values and standards, and of course the word comes from Greece. Ethos is the derivation, is the original word that the Greeks used, as how you look at life decisions, your attitude towards the world. And you can see that's a very general thing, but it's informed by so many things. Perhaps it's religion, your background, your family, where you live, your culture. There's so many things that play into one's own ethical set of standards, for example. Mm-hmm. But of course, each of us have our own view on what ethics is or is not. And then, of course, society and our town, our organizations also have standards and values. And what's so interesting is how you interact and how these things all play together. Because not everybody, obviously, thinks the same way or agrees with the same decision set on how you might look at a particular problem or issue. So it's, and of course, when I brought all these variables into the discussion, you can see we've been fighting wars and battles for centuries in the world over these same things. And it's can be a very charged, emotional discussion. You can get very angry, but it can also be a very wonderful thing to discuss and to deal with.
What? I want to interrupt you for a second because I think about certain scenarios, like, for example, religion. People in the name of a religion will say virtually anything about, being strong and being great and, being kind and believing in a certain kind of God, this whole thing. And yet, now I don't have to tell you, what's been in the newspapers for decades, and that is, for example, I'm not just choosing one religion, but in the name of religion, let's talk a little bit about the Christians who are, say, oh my God, no abortion, and you can't do this, you can't do that, and then we have the Arabs who, certainly have the Quran, and look what they're doing. Now,
right. I think part of the, part of the problem is with religion is people. And if you go back to the original writings, for example, that from Islam, Quran, the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, and the original meanings and discussions, which not enough people do, you find out that what has been interpreted and promoted is perhaps nothing like what the original writers and prophets had proposed. And its interpretations and judgments and decrees and decisions by mostly men over the centuries that sort of get us into the trouble I believe we have now. The original writings and the original meanings and precepts that were put forth, centuries or thousands of years ago, actually have some wonderful meanings and wonderful things to say. But unfortunately, people have used parts, misplaced emphasis, things like that, to promote more earthly agendas. And I think that's probably, just in a quick definition of why, or version of why we're in the trouble we are in the name of religion, because a religion itself,
that's what I was talking about.
right, is not particularly anti anything. Of course, you can pick out a phrase here, a section there of any of the major writings, but the general peaceful love for humanity that most of the Western and Eastern religions, I'm not an expert in really either, but certainly what I understand of them, the promotion of values and people getting along and society surviving and thriving is what is underneath and undergirds most of the major religious writings that most people refer to.
Yeah, and I was talking about the situation of hypocrisy. This is all about hypocrisy in my estimation for, people to talk about how religion is so important and, again, all the things you just discussed, but it's about hypocrisy, and that is, for me, just so horrible because you think about, people believe in and they want to believe in a society that is very loyal and very ethical and societies that care about one another. But when it comes to certain things like politics, religion, you find a lot of hypocrisy. But we're going to just move on. And
okay.
I want to understand a little bit about the ethical problems in the public sector, especially. Are they bad in Florida, in South Florida?
Well, certainly we over the last 15 years or so, we have, especially in Southeast Florida, we've become nationally and even internationally infamous for some very egregious acts from public servants, elected officials, and it would seem that we might be a little worse than others. But I think, let me just discuss here what's happened. When bad behavior happens in life, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, we have sort of a different view on both. If it's a private sector bad action, well, a company, corporation, there are things you can do. You can boycott or not go, partake of the goods and services of that company, and perhaps the shareholders and other groups can correct that there. But the damage is somewhat contained within that company. But in the public sector, where all of us either vote and support with our tax dollars, a city, a county, a school board, and a public sector agency, when people we've placed our trust in violate that trust, it stings much more and becomes a much greater problem, and it demeans the entire government, the image of government. And of course, government has such a low image in so many sectors in our society that any time an official is caught doing something wrong, it just sort of reinforces bad stereotypes that all government is corrupt, and we need a lot less government, and we should not support government, which is terrible for the kind of country we have, because the government, of course, is us, and if we choose to distance ourselves from it, things are going to get much worse. Benjamin Franklin once said, "You'll get the kind of government you deserve," and the more we push it away and demean it, we will get an even less effective government.
But Peter, let me interrupt again and say to you that such a small number of people really vote.
Correct. And of course, I think that's this feedback loop that I'm talking about. If you think government, you, the great you out there, think that government is corrupt, doesn't respond, is not paying any attention to what your feelings are, you will begin to disengage. And you will, why vote? Why go? Why get up and stand in a line or even do an absentee ballot? If you start saying it's them versus us, then we're down a bad road very, very fast, because then a very small number of people who don't represent you are defaulting to them, and they will then end up making decisions that will affect your life, and probably not the decisions you want to have made. You must be engaged. You must vote. You must participate, and the more you push it away, the worse things are going to get.
Now, you're in a college. You run an ethics department, and you're involved in so many things with the young people in the university. When you talk to them, do you find that they're engaged in, politics? They're engaged in having the opportunity to really give their opinion about things? I mean, what are young people like today?
Well, I would put them in two different categories. I teach both graduate students getting their master's degrees and undergraduates, working on their bachelor's. The younger section, the undergraduates, are very, very concerned about the future and what a future that may not be as bright as even their parents. This may be the first generation coming through now that their future will not be as successful financially and otherwise as even their parents' generation. We had a rising tide for so many years after World War II. This may be the first generation where things will not be nearly as good. That's certainly in the background. But even more, they're very concerned about sustainability and the environment and the future of the planet they're going to live in. They're very, very activist in many, many areas. And where I find that they're interested in ethics is perhaps not so much that the mayor of this town may be accused of wrongdoing, but perhaps the mayor in that town doesn't have an appropriate renewable energy program for the city, or recycling, or trying to make sure that decisions regarding the city services are environmentally friendly, and they think that, of course, is ethical or unethical depending upon how they view that. So their take on ethics comes from much more of a global environmental future approach. The master's students that I teach are many who are working in public and nonprofit organizations, are very concerned, however, with the traditional problems that I was mentioning a while ago, that the bad behavior in organizations, the bad decisions, the ability not to question a decision you think is wrong without being, having retribution back on you, perhaps threatening your job. So that's why all students are interested, but they come at it from a little different vantage point.
And it sounds like the older kids are much more cynical than the younger ones, maybe because they hear longer and they see so many things and read so many things, and also TV. And I'm going to end on that kind of thing before I ask you what you hope to accomplish. But what I want to understand, and it's, your opinion, I have thoughts about it as well, is what about all the news? I mean, I used to work for CNBC and MSNBC, and I know that everything was based on ratings. Do you think that television, do you think that radio is making much more out of some of the stories just because it brings in the ratings?
Well, I certainly remember the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads. So the sensationalism of a story, either in electronic media or print, whether it's a bad actor caught doing something, a sexual harassment accusation against a prominent person, those certainly are blared out in our 24-hour news cycle. But where I find that certainly the younger and people under 40, I will say younger in my definition here, is certainly social media is even a greater influence on when things are trending on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. That really seems to be able to quickly mobilize people more than it might be on a CNBC show. That I'm older, I do watch CNBC, for example, but things pop on Twitter and Facebook much faster and much quicker and can mobilize tens of thousands of people right away, I mean within an hour, where television and print and even radio are a little bit farther back in the pack now as far as the timeline. And yes, because we have social media and traditional media, we're surrounded. When I was growing up, there were 3 networks and no cable. There was just antenna, television, and radio. And you had more time to process stories you heard about, and you didn't necessarily have to react instantaneously. Now, unfortunately, you're almost pushed into responding or replying or liking or disliking something before you even know what the details are. If something just appeals to you on a hashtag, you might just jump right into it, and then you find out later it's all fake. That is a very bad thing, I think. The technology is pushed way ahead of our ability to adequately process information and make reasoned decisions. And
and that's, I mean, we could do a whole program on something like that, because we both know that the new media, or the new normal, if you will, and all these social platforms are really creating a different kind of society. I mean, I'll just say one thing about it, and I remember reading in the Wall Street Journal that our next best friend is going to be a robot. Now, I mean, do you agree? Do you disagree?
Well, yeah, I certainly, my next best friend, I think, and I hope to get one for the holiday, is a Roomba, or one that runs around the carpet cleaning up. That will be my best friend. But I've certainly seen the sci-fi and futurist movies about what will that technology eventually lead to. Will it be someone who looks just like us but is an artificial machine? I don't think I will be around long enough to be able to see something that sophisticated, but certainly robotic surgery, prosthetics, robot limbs and implants. That's a wonderful technology that's been able to save lives and improve lives. But like any technology, running amok and going the wrong way, it could certainly perhaps lead to things in a dystopian future that none of us would like.
I'm sure. Now, in general, what do you hope to accomplish? There must be something that is that you could pin down that you feel is really the most important thing at the moment.
Right.
Certainly, I don't expect you to talk about the future, because how do you know? But needless to say, you must have something you want to say about that.
Well, yes, and here, my little part of the world will be the Public Ethics Academy at FAU. We're going to a group of community leaders, some of which were the Ethics Initiative here in Palm Beach County, part of Leadership Palm Beach County, a group of concerned citizens that are lawyers and doctors and other community leaders, are helping FAU and me to establish this center, which will be a research and training center for ethics here in Southeast Florida. And we hope to have community forums that will invite the public and ethics practitioners in to discuss current issues here in South Florida. We hope to publish information for both the public and universities around the world related to ethics research. In fact, Merritt Steerheim, a very prominent public sector official in Miami-Dade County for many, many years, is publishing his first works with the Public Ethics Academy this next spring on his 50 years in good government service here in Southeast Florida. And we hope to have visiting fellows in to generally help raise the ethical climate here in Southeast Florida. So we'll be working within the academy, within universities, and within the community to make sure that the many things that we did well here in Palm Beach County, which was to establish an ethics commission, an inspector general, and make sure that the corruption that we had here in the early and mid-2000s that named Palm Beach County nationally the Corruption County on Time magazine cover, that never returns here to this area in particular. Also working with Broward County, our service area for FAU, to establish the same kind of things down there. So here at the university, if we can work a little bit to keep public ethics and ethical standards in the public eye, which was very prominent until just a few years ago. It's sort of fallen back a little bit out of the public eye. But as you read the paper and see the media, there are officials here in cities and in organizations, public sector organizations, that are in trouble every single day. And so the problem has not gone away. So I hope to be able to be active in that arena and making sure that we can keep sort of a light shining for where everybody should be looking.
Yes, and if people want to get in touch with you or, to find out a little bit more about the program at FAU, the Public Ethics Academy, how did they do that?
Well, perhaps the easiest way is they could certainly email me, and it's very simple. Email, it's ethics@fau.edu. So ETHICS, ethics@fau.edu. And if they go to the FAU homepage, which is fau.edu, and just search for the Public Ethics Academy, they'll get right to the website, and we'll be able to see what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, today my guest has been Peter L. Cruz, Ph.D., Executive Director of the Public Ethics Academy, School of Public Administration at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida. If I have to say, to you, Peter, if our young people whom you're working with, and doesn't matter what age, but this is a perfect thing for them, because if you think about it, what could be better than to learn how to be ethical, and if people are not ethical, to really make them aware that they're not.
Correct.
So
that will keep us in business for many, many years, trying to do just those two things.
You got it. So thank you very much, Peter Cruz, for being on the Susan Brender Show. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Susan, for having me.
And I hope we can have you again. You have a lot to say.
Thank you so much.
This has been brought to you by Megger, a company that has been serving the electrical test and measurement industry for over 100 years.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.